Progress is a good thing, but the progress of us humans can sometimes be very frightening. Right now, we live in a world where, with the press of a single button, we could turn everything into ashes. You might not believe it, but during the Cold War, the destruction of each side depended on pressing a single button. During the Cold War, there were events that, when we think about them today, we realize how lucky we were that the world was not destroyed and that everything was not drowned in blood. In 1962, the world was caught in the grip of two selfish superpowers that were satisfied with nothing but power. In that year, the Cuban Missile Crisis happened. In 1961, the United States decided to overthrow the government of Cuba. This move by the United States caused the Cuban government to fall into the arms of the Soviet Union. At that time, Nikita Khrushchev was the leader of the Soviet Union. When the request for help arrived from Cuba, Khrushchev was extremely happy. He said, well, they are calling us into America's backyard. Khrushchev not only deployed a lot of military aid to Cuba, but secretly sent nuclear bombs among those supplies. Before this event, the Soviet Union had never responded to any country's request so quickly. The communists were very happy that they were going right next to Florida in the United States. They said this was only fair. Just as the United States had kept nuclear bombs in Italy and Turkey to threaten the Soviet Union, they said that they would go to Cuba to threaten the United States in the same way. Tension between the two superpowers increased day by day. Then on October 16, 1962, the Americans realized that nuclear bombs had been stationed in Cuba. The generals of the U.S. Army unanimously agreed that all Soviet missiles in Cuba should be destroyed immediately. They decided to send a large number of airplanes to completely bomb Cuba. But John F. Kennedy, the President of the United States at that time, said no. He said, "Wait, this is a stupid idea." Kennedy told the generals, "Why do you want to attack? It's better to choke them instead." 6 days later, he ordered that every ship heading toward Cuba be stopped, and in a way, Cuba was placed under blockade. However, this action by the United States created an even bigger problem. When you interfere with a country's ships in international waters, it is considered a declaration of war, because that ship has not entered your country's waters. When Khrushchev heard about this action by the United States, he became angry and immediately wrote a letter to John F. Kennedy. In the letter, he said that when you interfere with us in international waters and free airspace, it means you are declaring war on us, and this could start a nuclear war. After Khrushchev's letter, the worst period of the Cold War began. It was a time when at any moment, the Cold War could turn into a hot war, and the fire of nuclear war could burn the entire world. John F. Kennedy replied to Khrushchev that if he wanted the ship blockade to stop, the nuclear bombs had to be removed from Cuba. Khrushchev said no, that they had not come to fight, and that the weapons were only for defending Cuba. After these exchanges, the tension grew hotter and hotter day by day. One of the best aircraft the United States had built for spying was the Lockheed U-2. On October 27, 1962, the Americans sent a U-2 spy plane, piloted by Rudolf Anderson, over Cuba. It was detected by Soviet radar, and they tracked it and shot it down with a missile. On that same day, one of the U.S. warships, stationed near Cuba in the ocean, detected that a submarine was moving under the water. They realized that the submarine belonged to the Soviet Union, so they dropped a depth charge near it, not to destroy it, but as a warning to come to the surface and communicate. But inside the submarine, they thought something else. They believed the war had started. They were deep underwater, and their radio signals could not communicate with anyone. Because of that, they thought the war had definitely begun. They immediately moved toward the nuclear bomb installed on the submarine and decided to launch the nuclear weapon. According to the rules, 3 people had to approve the launch. The submarine captain and one of the officers approved the launch, but the third person said no. That person was Vasili Arkhipov. At that moment, the fate of the world was in Vasili's hands. Because if Vasili had said yes, a nuclear bomb would have been launched toward the United States, and no one knows how many other nuclear bombs might have exploded in other parts of the world. At that moment, the life and death of millions of people were in his hands. Fortunately, those 2 men could not convince Vasili. On the same night that these events were happening in the Soviet submarine and Vasili refused to give his approval, the Soviet ambassador in the United States met with Robert Kennedy, the brother of the president. They signed an agreement. According to that agreement, the United States would remove its nuclear bombs from Turkey and Italy, and the Soviet Union would completely withdraw from Cuba. Interestingly, the very next day after that agreement, the Soviets began withdrawing from Cuba. After this agreement, the people of both countries mocked their governments. They did not know what would have happened to the world if that conflict had taken place. Americans mocked Kennedy, and Russians mocked Khrushchev. If Vasili had approved the launch that night, a nuclear bomb would have been fired, and we could say that the world would have been half burned. Those who survived would have remained in a kind of hell. Vasili did a great thing. After that, he was considered a hero by many people around the world. They said that if Vasili had been a selfish man, he would have approved the launch. But he knew what the consequences of such an action would be. That is why he refused. Vasili became so famous that many people around the world said he should receive the Nobel Peace Prize. What do you think? If Vasili had approved the launch, what do you think would have happened? Please leave a comment.